Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. Let's flash back just for a moment to my review of last week's Doctor Who episode, Wish World. Of course, the difficulty with reviewing what is effectively part one of a two-part story, albeit they've got different titles, is that no matter how good the first part may be, the second part may drop the ball, may not stick the landing. But I think when you raise the stakes so high, you get so high, you risk a great fall. That went well then. Let's get real. Hello, welcome back. My name is Paul Mount. So there we are. I am now in position to do my review of the reality war, the finale, as Russell T Davies would put it, to this latest season of Doctor Who. I didn't think I was going to do my review tonight. I put a post in the community tab to say that there'd been a bit of a domestic disaster, plumbing catastrophe, which disrupted my viewing of Doctor Who slightly. I was delayed watching it because we just discovered a plumbing issue. Then we had to get a plumber in and blah, blah, blah. And I thought, by the time this is all sorted out, I'm not going to have time to sit and talk about this episode. However, it's all been resolved a bit earlier than I'd hoped, I'd expected. So I have had time to sort of gather some of my thoughts about this episode and try and chat about it with you. Yes, what can I really say about the reality war? Wow, that was certainly an hour and 6 minutes of television, the like of which I've not seen before and probably won't see again. So many thoughts. Now, I know that this is going to be a massively controversial episode of Doctor Who. I know that people are going to absolutely hate it. I know people who've hated it. One of my best friends has told me in no uncertain terms that he hated it, and I can understand that. Doctor Who is often very divisive. And going into this episode, as I mentioned in last week's review, the problem is always going to be with these big finales that Russell T Davies builds up into these biggest threats ever. The stakes have never been higher. It's all chaos and catastrophe and the gods are aligned, and it's like, oh, I just wish that we didn't have to have final stories, final episodes like this. This has been, I think, a very good season of Doctor Who. There have been some very good episodes. I think we've had 7 good episodes. As I've said before, I wasn't too fussed on the story and the engine, and the robot revolution was what it was, but there have been some good episodes here, and it's a shame. It is a shame to see that in the big finale, where it all counts, where it all matters, where all the storytelling needs to fit into place, and you should be able to look back and think, of course that makes sense now, that's why this happened, and that's why that happened. So much of that was lost in a rush of massive exposition, garbled explanations, ideas that were just plucked from nowhere and flung into the script. It was just too much. It was too much of too little, I think, unfortunately. Now, I watched this episode, obviously, and I enjoyed it while I was watching it as a spectacle. There was lots of stuff going on. There was lots of things being said. I think there was some decent bits of dialogue and characterization here and there, but I think the overwhelming problem is that as a narrative, it was all over the place. It really was. And I was watching it, and as Russell T Davies was throwing in more and more bits of such obscure Doctor Who continuity, time rings, the Zero Room, the idea of Time Lords suddenly being sterile. He was doing in this episode all the things that he never did first time round. When he brought Doctor Who back in 2005, it was a clean slate. There was hardly any mention of Time Lords. It was this man who travelled through time and space, this mystery man who met a girl, and they travelled and had adventures. And as the years have rolled by, more and more bits of mythology have crept into the series. But generally it's been things that you didn't have to be a massive Doctor Who nerd to understand. So you'd have the Cybermen, and you'd have the Master and the Daleks, and even obscure things like the Macra. It didn't matter that you didn't know that the Macra had been in the story in 1967. It was just a giant crab. But now you have all these references to all this stuff that only the hardcore fans will know and understand and, to be honest, care about. And I actually don't think most of the fans even cared about a lot of this stuff. I know as a long-term fan of Doctor Who, I've long since stopped having shivers when things from the past in Doctor Who are mentioned, because it now happens so often. And after 62 years, I think it's understandable the show references its past, and it should be allowed to do that. But not in such broad, obscure ways. I think if you're going to mention the past, mention a previous adventure in passing or a character. But when you're throwing in bits of continuity, and you can't help thinking they're there just for the fans to be impressed and for the fans to go, oh, I remember time rings in Genesis of the Daleks. It just feels like Doctor Who has gone up itself a bit too much. And I think ultimately, much as I had a good time watching this episode, you have to accept that it was a mess structurally. It didn't pay off what it set up in the last episode. And worst of all, I think it compromises the whole season in a way, because there were so many interesting things bubbling away that really just didn't amount to much, really. That didn't come to very much. The story picked up where we left off last week, with the Doctor tumbling to earth, the Rani having dislodged the balcony that he'd been on. And suddenly this time window opens up and a woman pulls him through. And for a moment I had absolutely no idea what was going on, who this woman was. And then I remembered with a shudder of horror the last Christmas special, Joy to the World, and this girl Anita, who was the manager or manageress of the hotel, and there was all that stuff in Joy to the World about Doctor sitting in chairs with her for a year. And I really didn't think we'd see that character or that location back. And I think the moment when the Doctor jumped through this magic door that suddenly appeared, I think I said to myself, okay, this is going to be random. This is going to be a very random episode. And so it turned out to be. There was a hell of a lot of talking, as we often have in Russell T Davies's finales. It's a lot of people standing on very big sets talking. If you go back as far as Last of the Time Lords, a lot of that, the final episode was set on the unit heli carrier thing. It was people in rooms talking. And last year we had a very similar sort of finale with confrontation between the Doctor and the villain taking place in unit headquarters, with people talking and so much exposition and trying to explain things and justify things and make it all make sense. And it just got frustrating, because you think, oh, there's a bigger picture here, there's a proper measured story that could be told. But because Russell feels this need to just throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at the story, none of it has time to breathe. You don't have time to take it in. Little of it makes much sense. Ultimately, the plan for the Rani, quite simply, she wants to resurrect Omega, who's in the Underverse, someplace where Omega has apparently been banished. The tomb of Omega, I think, was mentioned at one point. Bearing in mind that when we've seen Omega previously in Doctor Who, he's been a man in The Three Doctors, played by Stephen Thorne, and in Arc of Infinity in 1983, played by Ian Collier. He was a man, he was a Time Lord. And I think, from what I recall from The Three Doctors, he was the Time Lord's stellar engineer who detonated a black hole and gave the Time Lords the power of time travel. Here he's been vilified, not as a mythical folk hero from the Time Lords, but a terrible criminal who's chained up and hidden away. And that's not what I recall from previous appearances by Omega. Although I think by the time of Arc of Infinity in 1983, I think he was more of a villainous character rather than this misunderstood maniac that he became in The Three Doctors. So the Rani basically wanted to resurrect Omega and use him and his power and other things to create a new Gallifrey and to create a new race of Time Lords who would be more ruthless and devastating than the old Time Lords. And obviously the Doctor was totally against that. Ultimately, Omega was resurrected. He emerged through the Seal of Rassilon, and as expected, he was a big CGI monster. Very similar to Sutekh last year. Sutekh in Doctor Who in 1975 was humanoid man with a mask. He became a massive CGI monster last year. Same happened to Omega. He becomes this much better piece of CGI. I will say that the Omega CGI was very impressive. This sort of giant mummified skeletal figure with these claws that came looming out of the doorway. But ultimately just another CGI thing, which, and this is one of the things that really annoyed me at the time watching it, picked up the Rani and swallowed her. So that's the end of the Rani. Archie Panjabi's Rani is just swallowed. Anita Dobson's Mrs. Flood, the alternative Rani, she just disappears with an amusing joke, and I can understand him not resisting that. To Rani's, it's good night from me, and she disappears, presumably to reappear somewhere down the line. And then the Doctor uses the Vindicator, the machine he's been using all season, to try and plot a course back to May the 24th. He uses that then as a weapon, which forces Omega back through the seal, which then gets locked up behind him. And while all this is happening, of course, Unit is fighting these bone creatures that are stalking around London, and the Wish World is being returned to the modern world, the real world, thanks to the power of reality that is coming through the time door from the Time Hotel that's being left open. And then the episode sort of ends with the Rani defeated and devoured, Omega defeated, and there's sort of 25 minutes of the episode left to go. We then get into the mystery of Poppy, the Doctor and Belinda's daughter, and she's been protected and saved by the creation of a zero room, call back for the fans there, to try and protect her from the effects of the Wish World being destroyed. And then Poppy is saved, and then she disappears, and the Doctor and Belinda have no memory of her. It's sort of gibberish, really. It's gibberish. It's nonsense. It's spectacle in search of a coherent story. I liked some of the character stuff. I mean, there are some nice bits with the Doctor and Belinda, and the Doctor realising that Belinda can't stay with him. Ruby going back to her family, and, them sort of going their separate ways forever. The Doctor using his regeneration energy to find Poppy or do whatever he did, realising he had to regenerate again. Which leads us to the end of the episode, I suppose, and apologies if I haven't gone into it in enormous depth, but it really was all over the shop. We get to the end then with the Doctor back in the TARDIS being visited by Jodie Whittaker's Doctor. Now, I have to say, it was lovely to see Jodie again. I didn't think it would happen. I didn't think she would come back so quickly. And I know that it will have annoyed all those man babies, and that alone made it worth the price of admission to see Jodie back. And I can imagine the screaming and tearing and rending of hair from the YouTube man babies who did not like Jodie Whittaker because she was a lady. So it was nice to see her back, and of course she's only just left, so you don't get the differences as you do when older Doctors come back, and they look noticeably different. This was Jodie back in her costume delivering that same performance, and it was just nice to see her again. And then the Doctor himself regenerates at the end of the episode. All very spectacular, bursts of light and colour, and he's standing on the doorway of the TARDIS in space, and he regenerates. And I thought that we were just going to fade there and they would leave it with something like the Doctor will return, because the show's future, as far as I know, remains up in the air. Nobody knows exactly what's happening or where it's going to go, when it's coming back. And then we have the Doctor regenerating into Billie Piper. Now, this has been rumoured a lot recently, and certainly over the last week or so, I have noticed that there's been a lot more traction given to Billie Piper's going to be cast as the Doctor. Billie Piper's the Doctor. And when it happened, I think that my reaction was not glee and excitement as it was when Jodie Whittaker regenerated into David Tennant, but, oh, they did that then. They did that. They went down that road. I don't know if it's a bit like the David Tennant effect. Bringing David Tennant back will increase public curiosity in the series, and bringing Billie Piper back, now playing the Doctor, is that going to get people tuning in again? If that's the thinking, it is very desperate. It's very, sinking ship sort of thing. And of course the credits actually said introducing Billie Piper. It didn't say introducing Billie Piper as the Doctor, which in itself is interesting. Because, as I said, we don't know where the show is going next. We don't know if there's going to be more episodes commissioned. We don't know for sure if Disney have pulled out, if the BBC are going alone. I honestly don't know. Bearing in mind, most of this episode was shot a year ago. Now, I know there were reshoots in February in Penarth, and I suspect a lot of that was the end sequence with Belinda, because I think, I'm sure we'll find out in due course, I think that Shooter Gatwa was expected to stay on for a third season and wanted to stay on for a third season. But when this big shadow of doubt was cast over the show and it became obvious they weren't going to be filming any new episodes this year because they don't know where the financing is, that's when I think he said, I have to leave, because he's got a career. He's a busy actor. He's in demand. he's not going to hang around for a year waiting on the off chance that he gets to do Doctor Who again. And I suspect that there was some sort of mutual agreement that he would leave and they would restructure this last episode, because clearly the reason it was 66 minutes was to add all this stuff at the end of the episode which led to the regeneration. I just don't quite know how I feel about this episode. I didn't hate it, and I know people did, and as I said, I know a friend of mine hated it, and I know lots of people will hate it because it does a lot of the things that rub people up the wrong way. It's Russell T Davies throwing everything he can at the wall, hoping that some of it will stick. Unfortunately, I think that this time, perhaps less of it stuck than usual, because so much was expected of this. And there was so much rumour and conjecture about what was going to happen. And some of it did, and some of it didn't. And there were so many wasted faces in this. I mean, there's some... Oh, I'm sorry that my review and my comments are all over the place, but just things are coming to mind as I think of them. The sequence with Mel, Bonnie Langford's character, suddenly realising who she is, she has to get to unit. So she gets on a little orange moped that we saw last year. And she drives it into the unit control room, which is supposed to be at the top of the tower. How did she get it up there exactly? Did she go by lift? Is there like a circular road that takes it up there? Stupid thing to worry about. But I just thought that scene is just there for a bit of, ooh, wow, look at Mel on a bike riding into Unit HQ. But there's no logical, sensible reason why would she do that or be able to do that. We also had the reappearance of Rose Noble, played by Yasmin Finney, who, as ever, added absolutely nothing to the episode. She was brought in during the David Tennant specials, and she's appeared once or twice since, been forgotten about for most of this season. And I think she had a line of dialogue in this. She seems to exist in the programme just so the Doctor can grab her and give her a hug and lift her into the air. And she grins. But she added nothing to the storyline. And all the unit characters, really, Shirley Bingham, even Kate Lethbridge-Stewart, Sergeant Ibrahim. I don't think he had any dialogue on one line. Fire! It was all over the place. It was all over the place. It was a mess. But it was a mess with bits that... It's a bit like a really bad meal. You pick out bits that are quite nice and digestible. I liked the bit with Mel confronting the Rani, that reference back to their previous meeting. I like some of the portentous dialogue between the Doctor and the Rani, where she's explaining what she wants to do and how he's going to stop her. I like some of the dialogue in the last few scenes, and I do always like those quite poignant scenes where the Doctor has to end up alone again because that's the way it is. But I think that the whole thing was just a big soup, a big stew of messy ideas and half-fumbled bits and pieces and random bits of continuity. Did not work as a story. And that's really what I want from Doctor Who. I want a story. I want a good story. And I've been thinking just this week about how Doctor Who used to have its finales back in the old days. And you would just have a story that finished the run. You think things like Talons of Weng Chang, which closed off season 14. Seeds of Doom, which finished off season 13. You never had these storylines and arcs that built up to something massive that didn't pay off. You just had another adventure for the Doctor and his companion, then the show would finish and come back 6 months later. I want it to be like that again. I really don't want these huge reality spanning storylines that really don't amount to much when you boil them down and when they're resolved with just a wave of the hand. Oh, the Rani gets eaten, the Doctor shoots Omega back into the Underverse. Bah. It's not really very clever. Doctor Who should be cleverer than that. So that's the reality war. I'm not actually going to mark it because I don't think I can. Part of me thinks it's a 2 out of 10 episode, and part of me says it's probably a 6 because I wasn't bored watching it. I got frustrated, I got annoyed, I got exasperated by the fact it was doing exactly what I didn't want it to do. So I'm not going to rate it because I don't think I really fairly can until I watch it again. And I don't feel I want to watch it again, to be honest. It's a disappointing end to what has been generally a good season of Doctor Who. I suppose that was always on the cards because Russell T Davies paints himself into these corners with these huge storylines and these arcs and these running things. And ultimately it doesn't really amount to all that much. I don't think it's a huge surprise at the end of the day that Mrs. Flood was the Rani. It may have been a surprise that Omega was coming back, but he bore so little resemblance to the Omega we've met before that it didn't matter. It might as well have been a brand new monster. It might as well have been the Daleks. It would have been nice to have the Daleks. And of course, Ncuti Gatwa now goes into Doctor Who history as the only TV Doctor, apart from Paul McGann perhaps, who didn't get to meet the Daleks. And I think that's a shame because they're so iconic, and it would have been good to have seen him up against them. Oh, and what happened to Susan? Excuse me, we've had these teasers of Susan in the last 2 episodes. Caroline Ford's back. Yeah, but she was back for a half a day filming 2 or 3 scenes. And I didn't expect her to be part of the story, running around and jumping about. But I thought she might appear in the TARDIS at the end of the story, the end of the episode, perhaps just before the Doctor regenerated. Because otherwise she just appeared and said, "Find me." But that's not been picked up on, that's not been referenced. There's no suggestion that he's going to find her. It just didn't come to anything. It had no purpose other than fan service, which so much of these last few episodes have been, unfortunately. So where does that leave us? I will probably do later in the week an overview of the whole season, once I've let it all sort of settle into my head. Where does this leave us going forward? I have absolutely no idea. I mean, I was told a few months ago that the BBC were going to arrest Doctor Who because it wasn't connecting with the public, and they wanted to give it time to sort of settle and go away, and for people to miss it and wanted to come back and be interested in it again. That's what I've been told. I've been looking very briefly at some of the online stuff, and Russell T Davies is being his usual ebullient self. It was a hoot to bring back Billy Piper. Is that a really good reason to cast somebody because it's a hoot in the office, on the studio floor? I don't know. And then he goes on to say, as for why the Doctor now looks like Rose, that's a different story. That's a story to be told. And then he says, Doctor Who's 62 years old and the adventures are just beginning. Whether that's just flim-flam and hooey, just to cover up the fact that they don't know what's happening or is not coming back immediately. Whether the casting of Billy Piper was a stunt for the end of the season. And I noticed in her press release comment, she says, I couldn't resist coming back one more time. Well, does that mean one more time, as in this episode, or one more time to play the Doctor for him? I don't know. And I have to say, at this moment, I don't care that much. Doctor Who, in these last 2 episodes, has just eaten itself. And it's now spitting itself out. I don't want Doctor Who like this. I don't really want Billy Piper as the Doctor. I know the Doctor can make himself look like people he's met before. That was the whole justification for Peter Capaldi. But I don't want this, really. As a Doctor Who fan for so many years, I don't want it to be like this now. And I think it's time for Russell T Davies to step aside now and say, well, there we are. I've done Doctor Who to death. Somebody else needs to have a go. We need to get some younger writers. We've had the whole run of this series massive, mega fans of Doctor Who writing it. Russell made it magnificent in his first run. Stephen Moffat almost ruined it. Chris Chibnall tried his very best to turn it round. Russell T Davies has done what he's done with his second run, and I won't say he's ruined it, but I think he's driven it right back into the arms of cult fans rather than the general audience, and that has always been a risk with Doctor Who. It did it in the 80s, it's done it again now. It's now aimed directly at the fans, but the difference this time is I don't think even the fans are massively on board. I don't think the fans are with him now. They may have been nearly part of the season, but I think this finale might have caused a lot of fans to walk away and say, right, we're sort of done with Russell's version of Doctor Who. So I don't know where we're going to go. I don't know when we're going to go there. Doctor Who clearly will return at some time, but I just think we need all new voices or younger voices or people who aren't so connected umbilically to the show. People who are fans of the show, who like the show as a means of telling interesting stories. But writers who don't really want to bring back 40-year-old villains and old characters who weren't popular the first time round, and writers who don't want to drown the show in its history. That's where it needs to go if it's to have a future. Ooh, there we are. We also had, after the episode, some clips from the upcoming spin-off, The War Between the Land and the Sea, which looks interesting. It looks big. It looks like a spectacle. Again, this is the story of the Sea Devils being resurrected and turning against humanity, and as we've seen from the clips, they are redesigned humanoid-type Sea Devils, which was to be expected, I suppose. The show has history of that with the Silurians, but I'm sort of looking forward to that. I like the unique characters, and it'll be an interesting stopgap, I suppose, until such time as Doctor Who is able to return. So I don't know where the future is. I hear different things being said from what Russell T Davies has said tonight, it looks as if they have plans for more episodes at some point, but that just could be a sort of a wall of distraction. I just don't know. Personally, I would like the show to have a rest for a few years now, because I think tonight just showed how it can be if it takes its eye off the popular ball and allows itself to just get too wrapped up in itself. So I think it needs to step away for a bit and come back 5 years' time maybe, with new voices in charge of it. Where that leaves the whole Billy Piper thing, I have no idea. That's thrown a little spanner in the works, so I don't know. So that's my very jumbled first thoughts on the reality war. I would be very interested to hear what you have to say about it. With this video, I'm not going to filter comments. I normally filter comments on Doctor Who videos because I don't want to hear it's shit, it's crap. But I think it has to be sort of Liberty Hall on this one. So let rip. If you didn't like the episode, I would like it if you could say more than it was shit. If you could explain a little bit more why you thought it was shit, that would be very nice. It's always been my sort of benchmark for commentary on Doctor Who. Please tell me why you didn't like it. But I think it's just open house really, because I'm sure that is such a controversial episode that is going to split opinion in several different ways. There may well be people who thought it was a masterpiece, and I wish it was. And I did get caught up with it for a while until I could see it falling apart, and then I just sort of let it happen. And I didn't detest it, but I certainly didn't like it the way I wanted to like it, and I really hoped I would like it, but secretly suspected I wouldn't, because I know Russell can't contain himself when it comes to these finales, and he unfortunately is rarely able to stick the landing. So anyway, that's my jumbled thoughts on the reality war. Please let me know what you thought of it. Like and subscribe to the channel as well. That would be very nice. Let rip the dogs of Doctor Who fandom, and just leave your comments and we'll see where it goes. If you're too abusive, then I will delete comments. I'd rather keep it nice and even-handed. But I understand that this is an episode that is going to cause some interesting comments, so I'll be interested to hear them. Right, I'm away. I will see you soon, and don't forget to like and subscribe, look back at the channel, blah, blah. I will see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff. Oh, Russell!